Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aviation Nerd Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Richardson, better known on the internet as That Aviation Nerd. On this podcast, we interview prominent people in the aviation community. For the first episode of this podcast, we have a very special guest. He did 21 years in the United States Air Force and was a flight mechanic as well as a flight engineer. After he retired from the Air Force in 1988, he went on to Boeing and worked as a safety inspector. He also happens to be my very own uncle, so please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Philip T. Holbrook III. Welcome to the first episode of this podcast. We have the very special guest, Philip T. Holbrook III, right? That's your full name, right?
You got it.
All right, great. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you grew up in Columbus, Ohio in 1947, right? You were born in 1947?
Yes, sir.
So, what was your first introduction? What was one of your first memories of aviation?
My father, he was in the Army Air Corps during World War II, but in the early 1950s, in Columbus, Ohio, they would have people standing on top of the Lincoln Lebec. I hope I got that right. Lincoln Lebec Tower, which was downtown Columbus, and radar at that time was not really something that was uh, as good as it is today. They would have people up there spotting airplanes that would come in and make sure they were ours, not theirs. And I went out with him one night and spent about 4 or 5 hours out on the tower. And I was only maybe 6 or 7 years old, but I was having fun. And that's what I base all my stuff on as far as the Air Force goes. From there on, I knew I wanted to fly.
So
So
how old were you when that happened?
about let's see, 1947 to 19 about six or
Wow.
seven.
So you knew pretty young. And you
Very
knew
young.
at that point you wanted to go into the military as far as
I knew I wanted to do something like that.
yeah. And so you were enlisted, right?
I
So
was enlisted.
yeah, so what drove your decision to enlist instead of being an officer?
During my high school, girls and cars were my thing, not studying. So my grade point average wasn't too good. So I could not go. I could not become an officer. So I did enlist.
Okay. So I've researched and learned more about the officer route. What was the training like to be enlisted?
Basic training was 6 weeks. Indoctrination into the Air Force ways. Uh, Marching was part of it. Uh, we had some schooling on the Air Force and basic military training,
Yeah.
uh, becoming part of a unit rather than being an individual. And when it came towards the end of basic training, they had a lot. Your before you went in, they would take they give you a test to see what your capabilities were. One was electronics, which I scored about a 70 on. But the biggest one I got, I believe it was about an 85, was mechanical. So that told them I wanted to become a mechanic, basically, and that's what I did.
And so that
So
was that your goal, or did you want to what did you want to do something else?
I just wanted to join.
Okay.
Uh, Mechanical was one of the things I was looking into, but I had no airplane experience whatsoever. So that's something that doesn't happen too often at that time anyway. Uh, from basic training, I went to tech school, which was Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, just south of Chicago, and that's where my technical training actually came in the being. We learned all about the airplanes, and I was too big to work on the small ones, but I was big enough. I was just right size to work on the big airplanes, and I'm glad I did because I had that was uh, that was something else.
What airplanes did you work
Something
on?
I really want to do.
So what were the airplanes you worked on?
I learned on the B-52 in school, but my first military base was out here at McChord Air Force Base out here in Washington. and it was a C-141 Starlifter, which is no longer in existence. They've scrapped all those because we ran the airframe hours up too high, too quick. So they had to get rid of them. But that's where I learned all about the airplane. I spent my first 5 years on it, for 4 years. I got back 4 years on it, and then I got transferred back to Ohio, and I spent a year at Wright Pat Air Force Base working on B-52s. And from there, I went overseas during the Vietnam War, towards the end of the Vietnam War. And I was at, what was the name of the base? It was in Thailand, Utapao Air Force Base, Thailand. And that's where I learned more about the B-52. The D model of all airplanes was the oldest one in the service. But they use those to do their, you know, their bombing, what they call carpet bombing and regular bombing of targets in Vietnam. I spent a year there. I came back to Lockbourne Air Force Base, which was renamed Rickenbacker Air Force Base, which is no longer there. It's a civilian airfield now. But that's where I worked on the KC-135. And I spent 3 years there working on that airplane, and became an assistant shop chief for the AR shop, which is air repair, which we did everything to the airplane that you can imagine. I mean, we changed flight controls, rigged flight controls, changed cables, changed landing gears, changed tires, changed wheels, changed brakes. Flight controls, let's see, what else did we do? Windows, we changed everything. We did all the work on the airplane that needed to be done. And during that time, I'll back up a little bit. My time here at McChord, I got to become what's called a flight mechanic, which we would fly with the airplane when needed. And I got talking to a bunch of flight engineers on the 141 at the time, and I figured that's what I wanted to do. When the end of the Vietnam War came, there was a lot of people transferring from the old airplanes to the newer airplanes. So I could not get into the flight engineer control and flight engineer career field. So from there, I went, like I said, I came to Columbus, and I spent 3 years there. During that time, I read in the Air Force Times they were looking for flight engineers for the 141. I put my name in as quick as you can imagine. Signed up for it. I got a call from one of the flight crew members I used to fly with. He was now the head flight engineer here at McChord. He says, I recognize your name. And he says, what do you want to do? I said, I want to come to McChord. I want to go to the 4th Squadron. And I said, I would love to be a flight engineer. He says, consider it done. We'll get you the paperwork. I got the paperwork to leave the base before my base commander did. So I had to go see him first of all. Anyway, after I got into the flight engineer career, that's what I wanted to do. And believe me, for the next 11 years, I was a flight engineer. And that's all I wanted to do. And I have gone all over this world on the C-141. I have been to Australia. I have been to the North Pole. I have been real close to Russia. We landed outside of the Russian country, but we were transporting stuff into Russia. Or I should say, picking up stuff from Russia. Goodness gracious, where have I been? To India. I've been to a place called Diego Garcia, which is out in the Indian Ocean.
What was your favorite place that you visited?
Oh man, I enjoyed Japan more than any place. We went in and out of Japan quite a bit. But I like Japan a lot. Japan, the Philippines. Uh, to me, every place I went was an excitement. Uh, spent time in spent time in New Zealand. Uh, we took some stuff down that was being airlifted out to the down to the South Pole. So we had part of that. I never got quite that far. But I was looking forward to it one time, but we went out on a mission that was supposed to go to the South Pole. We got as far as Pago Pago in the Indian Ocean, and we developed airplane problems. That took us out of the running to go down there. We spent a week on the it was a civilian airfield. We spent a week on the civilian airfield with fuel that we couldn't use. We had a whole full airplane, 153,000 pounds of fuel that we could not use. We could not return because they weren't going to take the fuel back that was bad. The decision was made that we would fly the airplane back to the Philippines and go from there. Uh, or not the Philippines, I'm sorry, back to Hawaii. And we didn't take any cargo or any people. It was a mission that they would hope that went off without hitch. And it did, even though we had all the what they call filter bypass lights. Every one of them was on. I mean, it was getting contaminated fuel in the engines. And in a jet engine, that's critical. But we made it, and we landed at Hickam. We got off the airplane. They took it into the fuel, what they call a fuel cell hangar, drained all the fuel, what was left of it. Excuse me. They got inside the tanks and found out that the sealant, what was used to seal the tanks, was all bad. It was coming undone. We had basically a bad leak in the airplane all over the wings, and we made it back without anything happening. So that was good. But I participated in the largest continental airlift mission ever seen. I guess I think it was 1984, 85, somewhere in that neighborhood. Uh, we were part of a group that did airdrop here in the States. It was practice, but they had, I don't know how many airplanes were involved in this thing. I really don't know, but it was something else to see. And again, I think I'm the jinx from this one. Just after we took off, we developed what was called a hydraulics leak, and we had to shut down the number one hydraulic system, and we could not fly in formation. We had to back and get out of it, and then go land someplace and find out what happened. But we were part of it anyway.
That's interesting. So you were a flight mechanic or engineer, whatever. So
Yeah, it's anybody that reads this is going to shoot me. It's a glorified mechanic's position, but the flight engineer, it was the person who knew everything about that airplane that there ever was. I knew as much as the people who built the airplane.
so you had a lot of responsibility.
We had a lot of capability. There's a lot of things on that airplane I could do. But that was before the computers. So our airplane was not a computer airplane. Even though it did have some computer capability, it was limited. Basically, what we call the black boxes that showed us, the radios and your flight attitude and things of that nature. But everything else was plain old bolt, nut, and wrench, and everything else like that. that was my expertise.
So what would your job be like today? Because I know you mentioned that you guys didn't have computers back then.
Today, the computer does everything. Uh, my job was to monitor all of the systems on the airplane, and I sat right behind the co-pilot sideways. And if you can ever picture, if you can pull up a picture of the flight engineer's control panel, you'll see what I had to do. I had hydraulics, I had electrical systems, hydraulic systems, air systems, you name it, fuel systems. I had to know all of that. I had to know every bit of that. The pilots knew a lot, but they didn't know as much as I did.
So I know you weren't able to technically by Air Force standards fly the plane, but were you ever allowed to?
Yes, I actually flew an airplane off. I took the airplane off, sat in the co-pilot seat, and the pilot helped me. And he said, "This is your first time?" I said, "Well, not really, but I know a little bit about flying." He said, "Yeah, I bet you do, as long as you've been doing this job." So he said, "We'll see how much you know." So we took off, and I was at controls. On another trip, we were coming back from Japan, a long trip for us, and they let me sit in the right front seat again to let the co-pilot go get a nap. I sat. I was there for about an hour and a half flying an airplane. Now there was a basic crew for a 141 is two pilots, two engineers, and a load master. So I wasn't neglecting my duties at all. I was a scanner during that time when I got to fly, but I learned a lot about the flying part of it as far as the actual controls.
Yeah.
One pilot told me, he said, "You got a heavy right hand," which means I'd sit there and hold the wheel, but my right hand would be like pulled down on that. So it was just something that everybody has a certain quirk about, and that was mine.
So at
So
this point, how long had you been in the Air Force for?
I spent 21 years, just a little over 21 years active duty.
That's a long time. I know we talked about some of the memorable experiences you had in your Air Force career, your 21-year Air Force career. So that's pretty impressive. What was one that really sticks out to you?
That's what I was trying to think of. I got an award for it. We were out with an island called Oman, and we developed a problem with the airplane. This was during a time when they didn't really want the U.S. military anywhere near that area. But because we were resupplying the Navy, planes would go in and out of Oman on a not regular basis, but not maybe 2 or 3 times a week. We landed there, and we developed a problem with the flight controls that we couldn't fix. And my boss went out to the aircraft carrier to call back and talk to somebody about it. They said, "Well, just leave it there overnight and just stay with the airplane, and we'll send somebody out." The government of Oman decided, no way, that airplane will either leave or we're going to push it in the ocean. They weren't too sure why we were staying there. They said they gave us permission. We had to be gone by sunset. My boss called back. He said, "I don't care what you do, you get that airplane ready to go." I said, "All right." There were two of us, and basically we got the airplane ready to go. We temporarily fixed the part that we had to have to fly the airplane. Uh, I kind of engineered and brought the whole thing together. We got back. We took off just at sunset, and it's a good thing because they had 6 bulldozers waiting on the side to push this thing in the water. Uh, C-141 is a big airplane. That would have made a heck of a that would have made newspaper for sure. we got back to Diego Garcia. We fixed it some more to where we could fly it into the Philippines and then get it fixed properly there, and then take it home. And we did that. We got back home, and my pilot decided to put me and the other engineer in for an award. We didn't know at the time. It got as high as the State Department because of what we did, which would have meant a substantial award for us. Yeah, an award as such, no monetary thing, but just something to put on your chest and say yes, I did. Uh, the State Department got a hold of it and said, no, we do not want to make a big international thing about this. We want to keep it low and very, very limited to the people who get anything about it. So I got what's called a commendation medal for it, and so did the other engineer. And lo and behold, after I got the commendation medal, about 2 months later, they decided to make me a tech sergeant. So that award brought more with it than I had ever anticipated. You don't go out looking for awards. You don't go out looking for things like that, and that's what happened. But the pilot did it, and that's how I made tech.
That's cool.
So
And
yeah, it was. It was very nice.
yeah. So
Yeah,
what aircraft? So I know you flew multiple different aircraft. You already mentioned over your career.
yeah.
Um,
But
you were and which one was that?
that was the C-141. I spent out of the 21 years, you can take away about 5 years or 6 years for working on other airplanes. The rest of the time was spent on the 141.
Okay.
And that's how come I knew so much about it. I mean, I knew where every little rivet was, every little idiosyncrasy about most of the planes, and I could fix it. So
So you could basically build an entire plane. Yeah. That's cool.
if
So
I had a little bit of help, yeah.
yeah. So actually, taking that experience, you retired from the Air Force in 1988, I believe, right? And
Yes,
then
sir.
what
On
was
October.
October? Okay. And what was the reason you retired? I mean, I know you loved airplanes since you were six.
Uh, it just felt right. It felt like the time to go ahead and get out. And I don't know what prompted it or anything, but I woke up one morning and said, it's time to get out. It's time to go work for somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say,
And
21 years is a long time. Not many people make it that long. You must have really enjoyed it.
I did. If they told me that I was going to say 30 years, I probably would have. I never said a word. But you had to be a certain rank to go on beyond the 22-year mark, and I was coming up. I had 21 years and about 4 months when I retired,
That's
and I had another 6 months to either make another stripe, and they were going to send me to Altus Air Force Base, which at that time I didn't really want to go there. It's just something I just didn't want to do. So I think I'm going to retire up here at McCord, and then from McCord, from Air Force, I went to Boeing, and they
okay.
were happy to get me.
Yeah. So I know you already mentioned. I know you went to work at Boeing, and you just mentioned it. Was that what you wanted to do, or did
Yes,
that just happen?
I had exactly a week and a half off from the military to Boeing.
Wow. So you'd already gotten hired before you left the Air Force.
I had applied in June of 1988, and in July of 1988, they told me when I signed my paperwork out, they said, "Call us, we'll come and get you." It's
Okay.
basically what, and the guy the person I was talking to, I had worked with in the Air Force, so he already knew all about me. So
So
he
you
said,
were just like,
I know what we're getting, so that's what I want you.
so at that point, you were just so knowledgeable about airplanes. Was Boeing just they really wanted you because you were so knowledgeable?
Just yeah, I wanted to go. I wanted to do something different,
Okay.
but not. I wanted to do something else on the airplane besides just fly it. Now, I
Yeah.
really wanted to know how they designed these things and how these things were built.
Right. And so you were the
So,
safety inspector at Boeing, right?
I was what no, I was called a quality assurance inspector.
Hmm.
Uh, I inspected basically every rivet on that airplane when they
Yeah.
put this thing together, and it
So
happened.
what was that role like for you?
Roll. Well, I'll tell you what. Uh, I got a few mechanics in trouble for what some of the stuff they were trying to pull. Uh, it sounds bad. It's not because they're under such a tremendous amount of they're told to get the airplane out in a certain amount of days, and that's all the time they have to build this thing. And things can happen. And that my job was to make sure that the airplane went out in as good as possible condition. And that was my job, quality assurance, and that's what they meant. So
Yeah.
the mechanics are good, but the gun that they're under during the building is tremendous. You got so long to build this airplane. They want it done in that amount of
Yeah.
time.
I know.
And mistakes happen. Things happen. So my job was to find those mistakes and make sure that they didn't leave the air. They didn't leave the hangar.
Okay. And so what was what you did you work on any specific type of aircraft at Boeing or was it just all airplanes?
Uh, 757, 767, 747, 777.
Basically all of them.
All of those, yeah. And my job was the basic construction.
Yeah.
Uh, they put the wing, they put the panels together, they put on the body structure. That was my job.
Okay. That's cool. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's hard. It's hard to explain the job that we did. We had a lot to do,
Yeah.
but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I know there are like some safety concerns currently at Boeing. I mean, there are obviously always things you mentioned. Well, what do you think? Were there those back then? And what do you think is could be causing them more now?
That I couldn't answer you. Back then, uh, it was just the limited amount of time they want that Boeing wanted these airplanes out. That happens. If you rush a job through, you're going to have mistakes. My job was to find those mistakes, and that's what it was. To make sure the airplane went out in as good as possible condition. So nowadays, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't have any idea how many. We had almost as many quality assurance inspectors as they had mechanics. So we were looking at the parts all the time.
Yeah. So,
So
yeah. Um,
that today I don't know. I imagine it's the same thing.
all right. So I know we are probably getting short on time here with Zoom, but you as we talked over, you worked in the Air Force, you worked at Boeing, you had a big career regarding aviation. Remind me, which year did you retire from Boeing at?
Do what was it? What
Uh,
year?
yeah, what year did you retire from Boeing in?
Uh let's see. I went to work I spent 14 years there. So 1988, 98, 2000, it would be 2002. I'd stop and think.
Wow. So
Yeah,
that means you
2002.
spent spent around 35, no, you spent more, like 35 years in the career in aviation. What would
Let's see, 21, 31, 30, just about 35 years.
what would be one word you would use to describe your career in aviation, if you can think of one?
Wow. Wow would be the one.
Wow.
An airplane weighing that much, or anything weighing that much, being able to fly was wow.
Yeah.
The first time I flew on one of those things, it was just the word that came out of my mouth was wow. Seeing them take off is one thing, but being up there, sitting behind the pilots or in between the pilot and co-pilot, where a scanner sat, and watching these guys do all this stuff in the airplane taking off into the wild blue was something else.
Yeah. And that regarding what was one thing that surprised you? So I know you mentioned earlier you were really interested in aviation since you were young. What was one thing that surprised you from when you were 6, sitting up there looking at airplanes coming in versus now 2002, you're retiring from Boeing in your aviation career? What was one thing that surprised you over your 35-year career
Surprised me?
about the aviation industry? What's one thing you didn't know or didn't expect going into the Air Force back in 1967 and then coming
Oh,
out of an aviation career in 2002?
hmm. Well, I've seen a lot. Uh, the one thing that did surprise me a lot is the newer airplane, the 777, was more computerized than ever. Uh, Nowadays, the things that computers fly the airplane almost without the help of a pilot or anybody up there really. Uh, but my job was the job that I had was now being done by a little black box. That surprised me. I didn't figure they would ever do away with the flight engineer, but they did.
Yeah, I know.
And in some cases, they got airplanes now that don't need pilots.
Yeah, I know. Back then, you probably couldn't have seen that coming. I mean,
No,
you probably
no.
don't have any idea what could happen in the future, but
We joked about it a lot.
yeah,
We make fun of the officers. Yeah, we don't need you guys to fly your plane. We just sit back here and we can do it. You can go back and sit back, do what you want to do. We had no idea that was going to become a reality.
yeah. What do you think could
So
happen for the future that like we wouldn't see now, but could happen down the line? Or do you have any idea?
I knowing what goes on now, but what the airplane is capable of doing now, nothing surprises me now. Uh, the airplanes that you can push the button. Right now, the pilot will sit in the left or right and right front seat. You have two on the big airplanes. You do smaller planes will do it with one man, but the big airplanes you have two pilots. Either way, they can sit at the end of the runway and push a button, and that's the last time they have to touch it until it lands at its destination. It'll take off, fly, and land itself.
Yeah, I know. I've seen some of those. Those are pretty impressive. So I
Yeah,
know.
it is. It is something else.
So I do know we're running a little bit short on time, but just like really quick before we end, what is one thing you would have changed throughout your career?
My career.
If you could go back and change something,
If
what would
I
it?
go back, I go back to high school and forget the girls in the cars and study.
And then become a
I
pilot?
I I would love to have been an officer.
Yeah. What would you have flown if you were an officer or wanted to fly?
Knowing what I know now, the C-141.
Oh yeah.
It was the first all jet engine transport airplane the Air Force ever had.
Yeah.
Now they've got a couple out there now that the C-5 and the C-17. They'll fly rings around 141, but at the time, the C-141 was the thing.
Yeah.
So,
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you
you're
for being
welcome,
the
sir.
first guest on the podcast.